Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is congressional candidate Adam Frisch. Adam, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Happy summer to you.
Happy summer to you. And I'm very excited to talk with you. You challenged Congresswoman Lauren Boebert in 2022 for her seat. You lost by less than 600 votes. Now you're back for a rematch. What's changed this time around?
Well, thanks. Great to be here. Yeah, it's last time it was hard to raise some money, get some media, and get people to pay attention. I joked that it took my mom. I had to call my mom 5 times to call me back to make a little bit of investment in her son. When 538 and a lot of political procrastinators are saying you're going to lose by 45,000 votes, it's hard to get people to pay attention. But I just knew in my gut that a lot of our ranchers and farmers in western Colorado, southern Colorado, kind of want that circus to stop, and they want someone to focus on the district, not themselves. So I didn't think it was going to be a surprise at the end of the day, but it certainly was a surprise to a lot of people. We certainly shook up the political world on election night when we were up by 4 or 5 thousand votes, I think, or even more. And then we ended up having the closest race in the country, down 550 votes or something like that. So, even though we raised more money than the representative last cycle, she started with a huge piggy bank and we started with zero. We ran out of money by a couple $100,000. We were outspent, or we could have just used 2 more weeks for me to continue to drive around in the red Ford pickup truck, talking to ranchers and farmers and small business owners. Brittany, our district is larger than the state of Pennsylvania. It is a 10-hour drive from point to point. It's 50% of the geography of Colorado. And, again, it's supposed to be an R8 or R9 district, if you want to call it that. But to me, it was always about building. It wasn't focused on blue or red. It was focused on building what my mom calls a team pro-normal party coalition. And that's what we decided to build. And that's what we built. And we're continuing and excited to tell that story through 2024.
You mentioned with a little more money or a little more time, you think you could have won 2022. But according to the latest numbers, you are out fundraising her by a lot. The Colorado Sun reported that you outraised her in the second quarter of 2023 by more than 3 times. You received 2.6 million to her 818,000. First, what's your reaction to that? And second, how are you approaching this election differently?
Well, we're proud. I wish there wasn't so much money in politics, but that's where we are. I would love to see some changes happen, but in the meantime, I'm full 110% on transparency, and we'll continue to collect the resources that we need. Yeah, I think we've raised over $5 million so far. As you know, 4.5 million through the end of that second quarter. We're proudly not just about that we're out raising her by 3x, but that we have more money from her and the small dollar donors, which are really important. We have donations over 160,000 donors or donations already individually, and we've raised more money than the representative on a percentage basis from within the district and within Colorado. So we're very proud of their message. Again, I went back to originally, as I said, people just didn't think we can do it. Now they know that there is a path to victory and a great path to victory. And there's so many people. It's not red versus blue. It's 80% of us out here are on Team Colorado, and 20% or so are on Team Chaos. And we're making that case, and it's resonating really well. And we're excited to generate that money, and we're excited to spend the time driving around the district in the pickup truck.
Adam, with all due respect, I remember covering the election night, and I was shocked at just how close this race was because it wasn't really on the
Yeah.
national radar. Well, now it is. So what do you think about your campaign is specifically resonating with people?
I think there's two themes that we were very, very focused and very, very disciplined on. And I just know from driving, before I started, it was confirmed after doing a lot of listening and learning, but a lot of confirmation as well. People want the circus to stop. My buddy Dean Phillips in Congress talked about this angertainment industry that is affecting politics. I give him credit for that word, but I use it a lot, and people just put their head down. They chuckle a little bit, but they see that that's exactly where so much of the noise that's happening on both sides of the aisle, and people just want to get back to focusing on team normal. The other thing that we focused on from a theme standpoint is they want someone to focus on their district and not themselves. And so whether it's water, whether it's domestic energy, which I'm a big believer in, whether it is the rural aspects of education funding or the rural aspects of healthcare access, not just how much it costs, because we have some of the highest insurance rates in the country, but also some of us are driving 2 or 3 hours to actually see a doctor. And we're just focusing on things that might sound a little hokey, but this kitchen table issues really, really matter. And there's a lot of people believe that the current representative is not focused on issues that are focused on them. And that's what we're resonating with and driving around. And we're just picking up a lot of support from Democrats, a lot of support from unaffiliated voters, which are 45% of the people in our district, and a lot of support from a lot of frustrated Republicans as well.
It's really interesting because I'm so lucky. I get to talk to members of Congress from both parties. And when you kind of weed out the headlines, what's making the most noise, you boil it down to those kitchen table issues that you were talking about, there is some sense of bipartisanship. People do want to work together. And in a recent interview, you said that you wish there was a get stuff done party. That's something you think is missing, you want to bring back. So let's say you're elected, how would you make Democrats the get stuff done party?
For 20 years, I've talked about if there was a get stuff done party, I'd be in that party as a citizen. And, the best way for me to show that, and I've talked about this for a long time, is to go join the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House. Not a lot of people know what it is, but there are 30 Democrats and there are 30 Republicans, and the 60 of them get together every once in a while, and they work together on bipartisan issues. So I'm not focused on red or blue or Anglo, Latino, young, old, conservative, liberal. I'm focused on getting stuff done for the district, and that's something that hasn't been done for the past 3 years. And I'm very, very confident once we get in there, I will continue to work in a bipartisan manner as I've done in my business career, building coalitions, as I've done in my city council work, and as I've done in the nonprofit world. It's just about some common sense stuff to get things frustratingly focused on it. I think 80% you talk to a lot more people than I do. I think 70 or 80% of the people in Congress are actually focusing on the get stuff done. They're just not really the ones that are on Twitter or on the camera all the time. And I think a lot more people in the country are sick and tired of the yelling and screaming. The only arguments I want to see in D.C. are arguing over who gets credit for all the good things that are happening, as opposed to who's to blame for things that don't get done. And so I just think that resonates with a lot of people. And it sounds hokey, but if people focus on kitchen table issues and focus on education and focus on clean water and clean air and focus on economic development and this, we need to push back for those of us that are in rural America. There's a little bit of an urban-rural divide. And I hate to use the word division, but it's out there. And I would love to see more people come together in any type of tripartisan manner, bipartisan manner, to focus on getting stuff done for the district. Ranching, farming, domestic energy, public lands. These are all really, really important to the vast majority of people in the district, regardless if they call themselves Republicans, unaffiliated, or Democrats. People don't wake up in the morning thinking that way. They're just human beings, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, and they want to focus on getting on with their daily lives.
That's interesting you say that. I'm from a semi-rural area in Pennsylvania. Right now I do live in New York City. And when I go back to Pennsylvania, the issues people are talking about there are so much different than the issues people are talking about in the city. In Pennsylvania, the price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of milk. Why do you think there is this such stark divide when it comes to the kitchen table issues, depending on the geography, urban versus rural?
It's out there. It's really, really sad. I mean, I think those of us in southern and western Colorado, we have a lot more in common with rural Pennsylvania and rural Florida than we do with Denver. And Denver has a lot more in common with Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. And, there are some common issues that go across all 435 congressional districts. But unfortunately, there is this lack of understanding of how hard it is to just live in rural America. And a lot of those conversations you hear out of Denver, our state capital, and you hear out of DC, the nation's capital, are just tone deaf to what is really like to live in a daily basis about ranching, farming, small communities, and getting to know everybody. We have two 100,000 person towns, but after that, our third and fourth largest communities in our district are 22,000 people. And in a 22,000 person town, the vast majority of people have some type of connection with the other people. And there's a lot more neighbors around there than there are enemies. And that's what everyone is really wanting to focus on instead of all the bickering in a very ineffective way. And I think our district is just ready to focus on what comes home. And in rural America, it truly, really is just the daily issues that face them. Gas is expensive because we in rural America are driving a lot more than a lot of other people. Our healthcare costs are much higher per capita because we just don't have the same type of supply options, if you will, in the medical marketplace. The same thing is happening in the schools as well. There, I appreciate that there's a whole conversation about school choice. Even in the districts that want it, that's not really an option because usually there's just one school, and these teachers work really, really hard to make sure that our next generation of ranchers and farmers in rural Coloradoans are looked after and properly educated. And those are really, really important issues. And there's just a different way of life when you need to drive an hour to do almost anything, or a half an hour to do almost anything. And the half an hour is not due to traffic and gridlock. I spent a little bit of time in New York. I spent some time in some big cities. It truly, really is that the libertarian aspect, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, a lot of us in southern and western Colorado just want to be left alone and want to be respected. And there's not a lot of dignity shown, especially by the Democratic Party, to those of us that live in southern and western Colorado.
How do you think then, as a Democrat, you would show that dignity to your community, to other rural Americans?
Well, I think I've proved that I have a pretty good handle on that. I'm always listening and learning. We've driven 24,000 miles last cycle. We'll continue to drive thousands and thousands of miles this forward cycle. Our district is about 23% registered Democrat and about 32% Republican and 45% independent. So in a district that's only 24% Democrat and we got 49.9% of the vote, I think we proved it to everybody that we're good listeners about what affects everyone. I really don't care as I said before, I don't care who you voted for in 2016. I don't care who you vote for in 2020. I will continue to say, I don't care who you vote for in the rest of the 2024 ballot. I just ask you to think about you and your family and your community and your grandkids, about who do you want representing you in Western and Southern Colorado in the House of Representatives. I'm laser focused on that.
In all of my conversations I've had within the past year about politics, I've never spoken to someone who is so ready to just put party aside and say, hey, it doesn't matter if you're blue or red, let's work together. I mean, you said you want to be in the get stuff done party. So what areas do you specifically see, let's say you're elected, that you could work with Republicans on? Where can you find that bipartisanship?
Well, the vast majority of the Republican counties in the country, the vast majority of the rural counties in the rural districts are represented by Republicans. So when I get into the issues that I really care about, because our district cares about them, which is water, domestic energy, ranching, farming, public lands, natural resources, the vast majority of those caucuses and the vast majority of the committees are really going to be Republican led. So I would imagine the vast majority of time I'm going to go in there and working a majority of the time with the majority of Republicans, and that's fine with me. I'm looking to find people that are taking the job seriously and are focused on the district and not themselves. And the reason we're doing so well is that we have a current representatives not doing that. But there's definitely are a lot of people that are representing rural America, some Dems and a lot of Republicans that are focused on their district. And those are the people that I want to go work for and work with to build a coalition to get stuff done.
Obviously, within the past year, one of the biggest kitchen table issues for Americans has been the economy. There was this talk of a looming recession that seemed to kind of fade away, but inflation is still high. And on your website, you wrote that you worked for 2 decades to create local economic growth and jobs. How'd you do it?
Yeah, so I've been in our district for about 20 years, but I actually spent, and it's no secret, I spent 10 years in the metropolis of Manhattan, very, very involved in the global financial markets, global interest rates. And so I'm not one of these people to promise that elect me and I'm going to make inflation go back down to 1.9%. But especially compared to the current representative, I'm happy to have conversations about financial issues domestically, internationally. But inflation is killing people. Colorado has some of the highest inflation in the country. In rural America, especially with gas prices, they are coming down, but they are still higher than where they've been over the past couple of years. And again, the reason I've been able to had a fair amount of success in the business world, in this big business, as well as in the small, as well as my wife, she helps run her family's manufacturing business. So we truly understand how hard it is to be a small business owner. My great grandfather opened up a cattle trading business in northern Minnesota. My cousin runs it now. And so I talked to him a fair bit. And when you talk to a fourth generation owner operator of a feed store grain elevator, and you spend a lot of time talking to other ranchers and farmers in the district, you have a pretty good handle over what needs to happen. And a lot of it has to do with just being left alone to be able to produce the food that shows up on a lot of people's plates and all the supermarkets. And a lot of the water that is used in California and Arizona and Nevada is coming out of the mountains of Colorado. And we want to make sure that our ranchers and farmers and small business owners have access to that water. And so, again, I'm not saying that the federal government should be trying to figure out how to fix small business owners. I just want to make sure that they have an environment from a tax structure and a regulatory structure of which to flourish. Domestic energy is something that's really, really important in our district. And I've made it very, very clear, even to the most liberal groups that I speak to, is that when we have a president of any party begging countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran and Venezuela for help when it comes to domestic energy supply, our country needs to have one set of domestic energy goals. When we're done begging bad countries for help about domestic energy, we can have another conversation. It's not good when we are begging these countries for help for our national security. It's certainly not helpful for the global climate, because I will guarantee you that every energy producer in the United States, especially in Colorado, is much better regulated for families' health, neighborhood health, and the global climate than what might be produced in Saudi Arabia or China or Russia or Venezuela. And so these are the common sense ideas that I'm trying to come up with, where a lot of people are in DC. They just don't get a lot of voice time because they're not, again, the ones that are yelling on Twitter or X or whatever that's called now, and social media, as well as some of the far cable news networks that are out there.
You mentioned small businesses. I do want to get back to that. And you said that you want to help them flourish. How exactly do you do that? Small businesses are the backbone of America. We're Forbes. We cover entrepreneurship. What would you do if elected to Congress to spur that entrepreneurship in America today?
Well, I think the best thing that we can do from the federal government is to make sure that the consumers try to hold on to as much money as possible, because, as you know, consumer spending is what 2/3 of GDP that we have in the country, and that's so. If we don't have, if these small business owners don't have healthy customers, it's really hard to have a healthy balance sheet. And we don't have a lot of really big companies in our district. We have a couple big steel mills and everything else like that, but a good chunk, far above national average, are truly mom and pop businesses. We have these main streets that are struggling of late because people are moving to the big cities, and the next generation ranchers and farmers, the current ones, are trying to hold on to those people to stay, but we're also running into some of that they're fleeing to get out there because they don't see the rural economic development that we need. And I would love to see more economic development through the Appropriations Committee, which I'd love to get on, especially in the Water and Energy Subcommittee, to try to figure out how to make sure those districts are good. As far as ranching and farming, we have to make sure that there is an international as well as a national customer base for the livestock that we're producing, for the produce that's growing, for the potatoes that are coming out of the San Luis Valley, so the melons that are coming out of Rocky Ford in southeast Colorado, right along the New Mexico border. So a lot of the agricultural policy that we need to make sure that we try to stimulate a global market for customers is something that I'm very, very focused on. And the same thing in ranching. We also need better help with better infrastructure. And our current representative continues to vote against infrastructure bill after infrastructure bill. And I don't want to get into the 2 trillion I don't want to talk about the trillions of dollars. I want to talk about the millions of dollars that our representative has turned down that should have come to Pueblo County, Mesa County, Alamosa County, and try to make sure that there is a better transportation infrastructure on roads and bridges and rail ports to make sure we're moving things around. And also we need to make sure that we have a strong domestic energy production, because while we have some big energy producers in western and southern Colorado, a lot of the residual businesses come from true mom and pop industries, and they just want to be able to produce. They want to earn a fair amount of money to raise their kids, keep their kids in good, safe schools, and getting a job when an unemployment rate is 3% isn't so much of a struggle as it is to get a career, not just a job, and making sure that there's a living wage for people to make sure that they get paid, and making sure that they have the regulation environment, which is stable, which always changes every 2 or 4 years, which is very, very hard. You hear this all the time for businesses. Like, I don't care where you plant the goalposts, just plant them and try to leave them alone for us, and we will kick the ball through the field goal, no matter how far or how narrow or how high it is. But we need certainty, and that's some of the regulatory environment that can happen at the federal level to allow our small business communities to flourish.
What would a strong domestic U.S. energy production look like if you, let's say you were in Congress? What would you want that to look like? How would you map that out?
Well, I mean, I think we're kind of piecemealing a lot of the stuff. I don't feel, with all due respect to this administration or the last one as well for that too, is that no one sat down and said, okay, listen, this is how much energy and power our country needs. And right now, we get it from these buckets. Right now, we're getting about 22% of it from renewable. I'm pro renewable. I'm pro all of the above. We need an additional, it's not just an energy transformation, it's an energy addition. I think whale blubber was the last time we stopped using an energy source. And so Colorado produces some of the best solar and wind and hydro in the country, but we also produce some of the best natural gas as well. And why are we making it harder and harder to shut down? Why are we making it harder and harder to produce domestic natural gas as well as solar and wind when we're asking for that exact same type of energy production or power production that's coming out of these countries that aren't exactly our friends, let alone this whole transmission issue. Obviously, we need to figure out how to, because where the solar and wind and the natural gas is produced is not always where it gets consumed. And my understanding is our country needs about 200,000 more miles of transmission lines to move even the solar and wind electricity around. And I believe our country is producing 1,800 miles a year. So literally, in 103 years, we will have the amount of transmission lines we need to produce the current energy and power productions that we need. And so we are in dire needs of trying to figure out how to come up with a regulatory environment of making sure that permanent reform is not just a buzzword, but actually gets implemented. And we don't have a national grid and a national process, and that is good in many reasons, but we need to figure out how to work with our municipalities, work with our counties, work with our states, work with these regional power lines to figure out how do we put in a grid system that can actually move around the energy that we're going to need. Because if we're not, we're going to continue to be begging some really unpleasant countries for help. And I don't think there's any reason to be doing that when we are a great producer in a very clean way for our global climate, as opposed to just thinking that if it doesn't get done in our neighborhood, it's not going to be bad. And the same conversation goes for, I joke all the time that electrical car batteries are not made out of chocolate chips and dandelions. They're made out of minerals that we need to figure out how to access. And right now we're getting them from some very, very troubling countries. And so I really need to think that our country needs to have a real mathematical conversation. And it's third grade math. It's not calculus math about how much energy and power we use, where are we currently getting it from, where do we want to get it from, and let's make up a plan to figure out how to not only get it, but also move it around to make sure that we have a stable grid that's reliable and cost effective and continue to produce, we have a climate crisis, but we also have a math crisis about a lot of people, especially on the Democratic Party side, who don't always understand the math of our domestic energy needs. And that's really what I'm spending time talking about.
How do you streamline this conversation and bring both sides to the table?
The third grade math says if we don't do all of the above, we're not going to be able to do anything close to it. And so as much as these goals of 2030 and 2050, they're just mathematically unsound. And I don't mean to be disrespectful or childish about it, but when you do the math of supply and demand, there's a gap, and we need to figure out how to do that gap. But again, if the only people participating in the conversation are those that are on Twitter and on the cable news networks a lot from either side, those are people that I really don't want to spend the time sitting around the table. I can tell you how it happens in western and southern Colorado. Water is obviously a very big issue, and it's not that people are anti-water. It's just how are you going to work together? So when we start to talk about the issues that we have with weather disruptions and the climate crisis, it's let's get together and talk about water. We have conversations about water. They realize there's no blue horns, there's no red horns. There's just people sitting around trying to figure out how to do it. Another conversation we get into is with the soil health. And if farmers and ranchers don't have good soil health, it's really hard to be a productive rancher or farmer. They know that they're hunted at different times. We're planted at different times. And so there's conversations that when it comes to the core issue, as opposed to labels, everyone's sitting around the table saying, yes, that is an issue that we're all facing. And people, again, they're not showing up with red hats or purple hats or blue hats. It's just like, hey, we're ranchers and farmers. How do we fix this to make sure that we can do the livelihood, to make sure we can feed our country and feed the nation? So again, I think there are a lot of bipartisan people in Congress. They're just stuck in the subcommittee and committee meetings. And that's where I'm continuing to be excited about the Problem Solvers Caucus and some of those other caucuses that are working on the GSD, which is the Get Stuff Done. And I think that's where the Problem Solvers Caucus is. And there's some other caucuses that are trying to work together. And I'm telling you, I'm not naive. I meet a lot of good people that really, really want this to happen. And again, I think that's why we've been able to resonate really well with a wide variety of if you are not a pragmatic farmer or rancher, you are not a successful farmer or rancher. And we have a very unpragmatic person in Congress right now, no matter what you might think of her. And so just this boring, pragmatic, get stuff done, hit singles and doubles, let's really talk about the issue and not really worried about the concerns. And yeah, I would say that we would be a better country if there were more people that were elected to office that were willing to speak truth to their constituents. And you don't see a lot of people speaking truth to constituents, and we need to own kind of the truth of where we are. And that goes back to energy, that goes back to climate, that goes back to the immigration policy that we need to, there's some really troubling things that we really need to see fixed that I do believe 80% of the citizens of our country are fully behind, and they really don't care about red and blue. They just want to focus on results.
Adam Frisch, I appreciate you coming on, breaking down the issues with me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Enjoy the rest of the summer.